Once a proud and respected man in his field, Edward had always been the epitome of success. He had worked tirelessly throughout his career, building a reputation that many envied. For years, his career had provided him with everything he had ever wanted: comfort, stability, and the respect of his peers. But all that changed in a single, heart-wrenching moment. It all started on a regular Tuesday morning, when Edward arrived at his office feeling as confident as ever. The day began like any other, checking emails, meeting with clients, and discussing plans for the future. But as the day wore on, something felt off. He noticed his boss, a stern but fair man, seemed to be avoiding eye contact and kept glancing at his phone. A sense of unease began to settle in Edward's chest, but he pushed it aside, thinking he was simply overthinking things. Later that afternoon, Edward was called into the boss's office. When he entered, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. His boss gestured for him to sit, his face clouded with something that resembled pity. Edward's heart raced as he tried to prepare himself for whatever was coming. He had worked with this company for nearly 20 years, had been a loyal and driven employee, and the thought of being let go never even crossed his mind. "Edward," his boss began, his voice steady but heavy, "I don't want you to take this personally, but we've had to make some difficult decisions. The company is restructuring, and unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. We've explored all options, but this is the best course of action moving forward." The words hit Edward like a physical blow. He felt his breath catch in his throat as he tried to process what was happening. The room began to spin as he fought to keep his composure. How could this happen? How could he, someone who had poured their heart and soul into this job, suddenly be told it was over? I don't understand," Edward stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been with this company for 2 decades. I've given everything. How can you just let me go like this?" His boss seemed sympathetic but unmoving. "I know it's hard, Edward. I really do. But this is beyond my control. The company needs to make cuts, and unfortunately, your department is one of the first to go. It's not a reflection of your performance. It's just a business decision." As Edward left the office, he felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He could hardly believe what had just happened. The next few hours were a blur. He packed his things, said his goodbyes to colleagues who seemed equally stunned, and left the building, his mind racing with disbelief and panic. The world he had known for so long had just crumbled beneath his feet. For the first time in years, Edward felt lost. The stability he had once taken for granted was gone. His career, which had defined so much of his life, was over. The idea of starting over, of finding a new job at his age, felt impossible. He had never prepared for a fall like this. His entire identity had been tied to his success, and now that was gone. That evening, he sat at home in his favorite chair, staring out the window. The weight of his failure pressed heavily on him. His wife, who had always been his rock, tried to comfort him, but even she couldn't understand the depth of his pain. Edward was no longer the man he had once been, the man who had provided for his family, who had been admired by his peers. Now he felt like a shadow of himself, unrecognizable and empty. His daughter, Lily, had been visiting that evening, and when she heard the news, her reaction was nothing like he had hoped for. She was concerned, of course, but there was a sense of disappointment in her eyes, one that cut deeper than any words could. She had always looked up to him, and now, seeing him in this vulnerable state, made her question everything she thought she knew about her father. "I don't know what to say, Dad," she had said quietly. "I've always known you as someone who could do anything, someone who had it all together. But now, I just don't know." The disappointment in her voice stung, and Edward felt his heart shatter. He had always been the one to take care of everything, the one to fix things, to make sure everyone was okay. But now, it felt like he was the one who needed fixing. The man who had once been unshakable was now facing the biggest challenge of his life. And yet the worst was yet to come. Edward had no idea that the worst betrayal would come not from his boss or his colleagues, but from his own daughter. As he lay in bed that night, lost in his thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change in a way that he could never have imagined. He had no idea that his life was about to take a turn that would change everything. Forever. Edward sat in his small apartment, staring at the walls that seemed to close in on him. The reality of his situation was harder to ignore now. His career was over, and his savings were quickly running out. Every job application he submitted felt like a shot in the dark. He was in his mid-50s, and finding another high-paying job in a new field seemed almost impossible. The world had moved on, and Edward felt like he was left behind. For the first few weeks after losing his job, he was in a state of shock. It was hard for him to adjust to this new reality. He wasn't used to sitting idle. He had spent his whole life hustling, working long hours, climbing the corporate ladder, and being the man who was always relied upon. But now, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. The man who had provided everything for his family, who had worked tirelessly to ensure their comfort and security, was now completely at a loss. The worst part wasn't just losing his job. It was the feeling of helplessness that had begun to settle deep inside him. Despite his own struggles, Edward tried to keep a brave face when it came to his family. His wife, Maria, had been supportive at first, offering words of encouragement, reminding him that they would get through this together. But even her optimism began to wane. The financial pressure was mounting, and the once peaceful home had become a place of quiet tension. Bills piled up, and the weight of the situation became unbearable. But it wasn't just his wife that Edward needed to worry about. His daughter, Lily, who had always been his little girl, his pride and joy, was beginning to show signs of growing frustration. When he had first lost his job, she had been concerned, offering advice and comforting him in the best way she knew how. But over time, her concern turned into impatience. She couldn't understand why her father, the strong man she had always admired, wasn't bouncing back. Lily had always been ambitious, self-driven, and independent. She had grown up in a world where success was everything. Her father had been the one who taught her that hard work and determination would get you anywhere you wanted to go. Now she watched him struggle, and it made her question everything she had believed about him. As the days went by, Edward tried to stay positive, but it became more and more difficult. His once confident demeanor was replaced with quiet resignation. He knew he couldn't go on like this forever. He didn't want to burden his family with his troubles, but the pressure was starting to show. It wasn't just the financial strain. It was the emotional toll that was beginning to affect his relationship with Lily. One evening, Lily came to visit him in his apartment. She had always been close to her father, but this time, something was different. She had a look in her eyes that Edward didn't recognize. It was a mixture of disappointment, frustration, and confusion. "Dad," she began, her voice shaky but firm. "I've been thinking a lot lately. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I've been trying to support you, but it's just getting harder. You need to do something. You need to pull yourself together. You've always been the one to tell me to keep pushing, to never give up. But now, I don't know." Edward felt a lump form in his throat. He had always known that Lily was strong, but he never expected her to be so cold, so distant. He had always been the one to hold everything together, to be the rock. Now it felt like she was slipping away from him, and he wasn't sure how to stop it. "What do you mean, Lily?" Edward asked softly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I'm doing everything I can. I'm trying to find work, trying to keep us afloat." "I know, Dad," Lily replied, her voice breaking slightly. "But it's not enough. I can't keep watching you like this. I've been dealing with my own stress, trying to figure out my future, and now I'm worried about you too. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. I need you to be strong again, to fix things. You've always been the one who made everything better." Edward's heart sank. He had always prided himself on being the provider, the protector, the one who made everything right. But now it felt like his own daughter was turning her back on him. And he couldn't understand why. The man who had spent his whole life building his family's future was now being cast aside by the very person he had raised. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she stood up, her body tense with frustration. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I need you to do something. I can't keep watching you like this. I'm sorry, but I have to go. I can't do this anymore." And with that, she walked out the door, leaving Edward alone in his small apartment, a flood of emotions washing over him. He had always been there for her, always supported her, but now it felt like she was abandoning him when he needed her most. It was the hardest thing he had ever experienced, the feeling that his own daughter had given up on him. Edward sat down, feeling utterly defeated. He had never imagined that the woman he had raised, the one who had always looked up to him, would ever feel this way. But in that moment, he realized that everything had changed. He wasn't the man he used to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest pill to swallow of all. But what Edward didn't know was that his daughter's decision, her harsh words, and her departure would set into motion a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. The secret he had been hiding would soon come to light, and everything would change again. But for now, he was left to grapple with the pain of his daughter's rejection and the overwhelming feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Edward sat in the quiet of his small apartment, the weight of the world pressing down on his chest. His daughter, Lily, had left him in a way he never expected. The anger, the disappointment, and the coldness in her voice still echoed in his mind. It hurt more than he could have imagined. He had always been the one to offer guidance, to be the stable figure in her life. And now she was gone, rejecting him in the hardest moment of his life. The days that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Edward's thoughts were consumed by what had happened, replaying every conversation, every decision that led him to this point. He had tried to reach out to Lily, but she had stopped answering his calls, stopped responding to his messages. The pain of losing his career was one thing, but losing his daughter's respect felt like a loss he couldn't recover from. Edward knew that something had to change. He had spent his entire life providing for his family, building a future for them, and he couldn't just let this defeat him. He couldn't let his own failure be the thing that defined the rest of his life. But there was more to the story. There was something he had kept hidden for years, a secret that he had never shared with anyone, not even his daughter. It was something that could change everything. It all started many years ago, long before Edward's career took its unexpected turn. While he was still in his prime, working hard at his job, he had invested in something that had seemed like a long shot, a risky business venture with a group of entrepreneurs. At the time, he wasn't sure how it would turn out, but he had put a portion of his savings into it, hoping for the best. It was something that had been kept private, something that wasn't shared with anyone in the family. Over the years, as his career grew and his family life flourished, the investment became a distant memory. He never thought much about it, especially as he climbed the corporate ladder and became more successful. But as his career began to crumble and his job became less stable, Edward realized that the small investment he had made all those years ago was no longer just a long shot. It had grown into something far more valuable than he could have ever imagined. The business had taken off in ways that no one could have predicted. It had grown into a massive enterprise, and the investment that Edward had made so long ago had become worth millions. In fact, the company had recently reached a milestone that resulted in a $10 million payout. It was an unexpected windfall that could have changed everything for Edward. But he hadn't shared the news with anyone. Not his wife, not his daughter. He kept it to himself. Why? Because Edward didn't want to be seen as someone who relied on luck or external factors. He didn't want to be judged for his financial success, not coming from his own career, but from a hidden investment. He felt ashamed, as if it would diminish the hard work he had put into his professional life. He was determined to prove that he could stand on his own 2 feet, without relying on anything outside of his efforts. And so, he kept the secret buried deep inside. But now, in the aftermath of losing his job and his daughter's rejection, Edward realized just how much that secret could change things. If Lily knew the truth, would it change her opinion of him? Would she understand why he had kept it hidden for so long? Or would it only make her more upset, knowing that he hadn't been honest with her? Edward decided that he could no longer keep this secret. He couldn't let the misunderstanding between him and his daughter fester any longer. The money from the investment was there, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about restoring the trust that had been lost, about proving to Lily that he wasn't a failure, that he hadn't given up. There was more to him than the career that had slipped through his fingers. He wasn't just a man defined by his job. One evening, after much hesitation, Edward called Lily. His heart raced as he dialed the number, not knowing what kind of reaction he would get. To his surprise, she answered after only a few rings. "Dad?" Lily's voice was softer this time, not as cold as it had been. There was a sense of uncertainty in her tone, as if she, too, was unsure of where they stood. "Lily, I need to talk to you," Edward said, his voice filled with emotion. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago, something I should have never kept from you. I've been hiding something from you, and it's time I tell you the truth." Lily was quiet for a moment, and Edward could feel the tension on the other end of the line. "What is it, Dad?" she finally asked, her voice hesitant. "I didn't just lose my career," Edward began. "I've been hiding something that could change everything. A few years ago, I made an investment, and it's turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to rely on it. I didn't want to seem like I was hiding behind something that wasn't the result of my own hard work. But the truth is, that investment has paid off. I've received $10 million from it." Lily was silent for several seconds, and Edward could practically hear the wheels turning in her mind. He could only imagine what she was thinking. "I don't know what to say, Dad," she finally said. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this from me?" "I didn't want to disappoint you," Edward replied softly. "I didn't want you to think I was trying to take the easy way out. But now, I see that it doesn't matter. I've been so focused on proving myself that I lost sight of what really matters, our relationship." Lily's voice cracked as she spoke again. "Dad, I had no idea. I was so caught up in my own frustration, I couldn't see what you were going through. I'm sorry." Edward felt a weight lift off his shoulders as he heard the sincerity in her voice. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, understanding, and the bond they had once shared. "I'm sorry, too," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have trusted you enough to tell you the truth." In that moment, Edward knew that things were about to change. The secret had been revealed, and it had opened the door to healing. His relationship with Lily wasn't perfect, but it was on the path to recovery. And with that, Edward realized that sometimes the hardest secrets to keep are the ones that need to be told the most. The days following the revelation of Edward's hidden secret felt like a turning point in his life. The weight he had carried for so long, both from his career loss and the secret he had kept from his daughter, was now slowly lifting. Though there was still tension between him and Lily, there was also something else: hope. He had told her the truth, and she had responded with sincerity. For the first time in weeks, Edward felt like there was a chance for things to get better, for the rift between them to heal. As he sat in his apartment, staring out of the window, Edward reflected on everything that had happened. It felt surreal. Just days ago, he had been on the edge, feeling as if his life was falling apart, unable to see a way out. Now, with Lily's phone call, and the truth finally out in the open, it was as if a new chapter was beginning. But it wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding a relationship after such a breakdown would take time, effort, and patience. Edward knew that. He had always believed in hard work, that anything worth having was worth fighting for. This wasn't any different. If he wanted to regain his daughter's trust, he had to show her that he was more than just a man who had lost his career. He needed to prove that he could be the father she once knew, the one who supported her, loved her unconditionally, and was always there for her. Lily hadn't called for several days after the conversation, and Edward was starting to feel that familiar sense of uncertainty creeping back in. He didn't want to push her, but he also didn't want her to think that he had given up on their relationship. Then, one evening, just as he was about to head to bed, his phone rang. The caller ID read Lily. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly answered, "Dad." Lily's voice was soft, but there was a warmth to it that had been missing in their previous conversations. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I want to see you. I think we need to talk." Edward's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped for this moment, but hearing her words made him realize just how much he had missed her. "Of course, Lily. I'd love to see you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. They agreed to meet at a small cafe that they used to visit when Lily was younger. It was a place filled with memories, a place where they had shared laughter, conversations, and moments that Edward now cherished deeply. As he drove to the cafe, his heart raced with anticipation. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that this meeting was a crucial step in repairing their relationship. When he arrived, he saw her sitting at a table near the window, looking out at the bustling street outside. Lily had always been an independent soul, someone who was strong-willed and focused on her goals. But today, she looked different. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that Edward hadn't seen in a long time. She looked up as he approached, and for a moment, they both stood still, unsure of how to begin. "Hi, Dad," Lily said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Edward smiled, his heart aching. "Yeah, it has." He sat down across from her, and they both stared at each other for a moment, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. There was an understanding now, an unspoken acknowledgement that things had changed, but there was still love beneath it all. Lily took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and about everything that's happened. I think I was so focused on what you had lost that I couldn't see what you still had. I've always admired you, Dad. I looked up to you because you were strong, you were successful, and when you lost your job, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to see you in this new way." Edward reached across the table and gently took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I never wanted to disappoint you, Lily. I didn't want to be seen as someone who couldn't handle his own problems. I should have been more open with you, but I was afraid. Afraid that you would see me as a failure, or that you would think I couldn't take care of you and Mom anymore." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed his hand. "I never thought of you as a failure, Dad. I was just angry. Angry that you weren't the man I thought you were. But now, I see that I was wrong. You're still my dad, and you're still the same person I've always admired. You made a mistake, but that doesn't define you. I was too caught up in my own pride to see that." Edward felt a wave of relief wash over him as he heard her words. He had never stopped loving her, but he had feared that their bond was broken beyond repair. Now it seemed like they were finally starting to understand each other again. "I'm sorry, Lily," he whispered. "I should have told you about the investment, about everything I've been going through. I didn't want to keep secrets from you. I just wanted to be the man you could rely on. But I see now that being honest, being open with you, is what really matters." Lily nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'm sorry, too. I didn't understand. I thought you were weak because you lost your job, but I see now that you've been stronger than I gave you credit for." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. Then Edward smiled, the same smile he had given her when she was younger, when she was hurt or sad, when she needed comfort. "I'm glad we're talking, Lily. I've missed you more than you know." Lily smiled back, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I've missed you too, Dad, and I'm so proud of you. You've always been my hero, and nothing can change that." In that moment, everything changed. The years of misunderstanding, the pain of rejection, and the fear of losing each other began to fade. Edward and Lily had found their way back to each other, and it was clear that this reunion wasn't just about mending broken trust. It was about building something stronger, something even more resilient than before. As they stood up to leave, Edward put his arm around his daughter, pulling her into a warm hug. It wasn't just a hug between a father and daughter. It was a promise that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, Edward felt hopeful. He had lost his career, but in that moment, he realized that he had found something even more valuable: the love and forgiveness of his daughter. And that was all he needed to rebuild his life.